Hello everyone. Welcome to the world of e-education. Now we are going to read the Ethics in Governance by Second Administrative Reforms Commission. This video book is important for fourth paper of UPSC. So let's start. Lesson 1 Introduction. 1.1 Ethics is a set of standards that society places on itself and which helps guide behavior, choices and actions. The Commission is painfully aware that standards do not by themselves ensure ethical behavior, that requires a robust culture of integrity. The crux of ethical behavior does not lie in bold words and expressions enshrined as standards, but in their adoption in action, in sanctions against their violations, in putting in place competent disciplinary bodies to investigate allegations of violations and impose sanctions quickly, and in promoting a culture of integrity. 1.2 Corruption is an important manifestation of the failure of ethics. The word corrupt is derived from the Latin word corruptus, meaning to break or destroy. The word ethics is from the original Greek term ethikos, meaning arising from habit. It is unfortunate that corruption has, for many, become a matter of habit, ranging from grand corruption involving persons in high places to retail corruption touching the everyday life of common people. 1.3 Anti-corruption interventions so far made are seen to be ineffectual, and there is widespread public cynicism about them. The interventions are seen as mere posturing without any real intention to bring the corrupt to book. They are also seen as handy weapons for partisan, political use to harass opponents. Corruption is so deeply entrenched in the system that most people regard corruption as inevitable, and any effort to fight it is futile. This cynicism is spreading so fast that it bodes ill for our democratic system itself. 1.4 There are two, somewhat contrary, approaches in dealing with corruption and abuse of office. The first is overemphasis on values and character. Many people lament the decline in values and the consequent rise in corruption. The implicit assumption is that until values are restored, nothing much can be done to improve the conduct of human beings. The second approach is based on the belief that most human beings are fundamentally decent and socially conscious, but there is always a small proportion of people which cannot reconcile individual goals with the good of society. Such deviant people tend to pursue personal gain at the cost of public good, and the purpose of organized government is to punish such deviant behavior. If good behavior is consistently rewarded and bad behavior consistently punished, the bulk of the people follow the straight and narrow path. However, if good behavior is not only not rewarded but is actually fraught with difficulties, and bad behavior is not only not punished but is often extravagantly rewarded, then the bulk of the people tend to stray from the honorable path. 1.5 In the real world, both values and institutions matter. Values are needed to serve as guiding stars, and they exist in abundance in our society. A sense of right and wrong is intrinsic to our culture and civilization. But values need to be sustained by institutions to be durable and to serve as an example to others. Values without institutional support will soon be weakened and dissipated. Institutions provide the container, which gives shape and content to values. This is the basis of all statecraft and laws and institutions. While incentives and institutions matter for all people, they are critical in dealing with the army of public servants, elected or appointed, endowed with authority to make decisions and impact on human lives, and exercising the power to determine allocation of resources. Public office and control over public purse offer enormous temptation and opportunity to promote private gain at public cost. Therefore, creation of institutions and designing of incentives are of utmost importance in promoting ethical conduct of public servants. 1.6 In our society, corruption and abuse of office has been aggravated by three factors. First, there is a colonial legacy of unchallenged authority and propensity to exercise power arbitrarily. In a society which worships power, it is easy for public officials to deviate from ethical conduct. Second, there is enormous asymmetry of power in our society. Nearly 90% of our people are in the unorganized sector. Quite a number of them lead a precarious existence, depending on subsistence wages with no job security. And nearly 70% of the organized workers with job security and regular monthly wage are employed by the state directly or through public sector undertakings. Almost all these employees are educated in a largely illiterate and semi-literate society, and economically even the lowliest of public servants are better off than most people in the country. What is more, their employment in government comes with all the trappings of power. Such asymmetry of power reduces societal pressure to conform to ethical behavior and makes it easy to indulge in corruption. 1.7 Third, as a conscious choice, the Indian state in the early decades after independence chose a set of policies whose unintended consequence was to put the citizen at the mercy of the state. Overregulation, severe restrictions on economic activity, excessive state control, near monopoly of the government in many sectors, and an economy of scarcity all created conditions conducive to unbridled corruption. In addition, many state subsidies and beneficiary-oriented programs in a situation of asymmetry of power converted the public servant into patron and master and reduced most citizens into mendicants. This at once enhanced opportunities to indulge in corruption and reduced the citizens' capacity to resist extortionary demands. 1.8 The experience of the past 6 decades in our country and elsewhere offers us valuable lessons in curbing corruption. It is generally recognized that monopoly and discretion increase the propensity to corruption, while competition and transparency reduce corruption. This has been dramatically witnessed in India in the wake of economic liberalization. As competition came in and choice expanded, corruption plummeted. Telephones, steel, cement, sugar, and even two-wheelers are among the many sectors which have seen enhanced supply and choice, reducing or even eliminating corruption. Similarly, wherever technology and transparency have been introduced, corruption has been significantly contained. Computerization and access to information have made many services from railway reservation to issuing of driving licenses increasingly free from corruption. 1.9 A factor which increases corruption is over-centralization. The more remotely power is exercised from the people, the greater is the distance between authority and accountability. The large number of functionaries between the citizen and final decision makers makes accountability diffused and the temptation to abuse authority strong. For a large democracy, India probably has the smallest number of final decision makers. Local government is not allowed to take root and power has been concentrated both horizontally and vertically in a few hands. The net results are weakened citizenry and mounting corruption. 1.10 It is well recognized that every democracy requires the empowerment of citizens in order to hold those in authority to account. Right to information, effective citizens' charters, opportunity and incentives to promote proactive approach of citizens, stakeholders' involvement in delivery of public services, public consultation in decision making and social auditing are some of the instruments of accountability that dramatically curbed corruption and promoted integrity and quality of decision making. 1.11 In the ultimate analysis, the state and a system of laws exist in order to enforce compliance and promote desirable behavior. Therefore, enforcement of rule of law and deterrent punishment against corruption are critical to build an ethically sound society. A detailed analysis of our anti-corruption mechanisms and the causes of their failure is necessary in order to strengthen the forces of law and deter the corrupt public servants. 1.12 Perhaps the most important determinant of the integrity of a society or the prevalence of corruption is the quality of politics. If politics attracts and rewards men and women of integrity, competence and passion for public good, then the society is safe and integrity is maintained. But if honesty is incompatible with survival in politics, and if public life attracts undesirable and corrupt elements seeking private gain, then abuse of authority and corruption become the norm. In such a political culture and climate, desirable initiatives will not yield adequate dividends. Competition and decentralization certainly reduce corruption in certain sectors. But if the demand for corruption is fueled by an inexhaustible appetite for illegitimate funds in politics, then other avenues of corruption will be forcibly opened up. As a result, even as corruption declines in certain areas, it shifts to other, sometimes more dangerous, areas in which competition cannot be introduced and the state exercises a natural monopoly. What is needed with liberalization is corresponding political and governance reform to alter the incentives in politics and public office and to promote integrity and ethical conduct. 1.13 All forms of corruption are reprehensible and we need to promote a culture of zero tolerance of corruption. But some forms of corruption are much more pernicious than others and deserve closer attention. In a vast majority of cases of bribery, the citizen is a victim of extortion and is compelled to pay a bribe in order to get a service to which he is entitled. Experience has taught most citizens that there is a vicious cycle of corruption operating and they often end up losing much more by resisting corruption. Delays, harassment, lost opportunity, loss of precious time and wages, uncertainty and, at times, potential danger of loss of life or limb could result from resistance to corruption and non-compliance with demands. In such cases, the citizen is an unwilling victim of coercive corruption. But there are several cases of collusion between the bribe giver and corrupt public servant. In such cases of collusive corruption, both parties benefit at immense cost to society. Awarding of contracts for public works and procurement of goods and services, recruitment of employees, evasion of taxes, substandard projects, collusive violation of regulations, adulteration of foods and drugs, obstruction of justice and concealing or doctoring evidence in investigation are all examples of such dangerous forms of corruption. As the economy is freed from state controls, extortionary corruption declines and collusive corruption tends to increase. We need to fashion strong and effective instruments to deal with this growing menace of collusive corruption, which is undermining the very foundations of our democracy and endangering society. 1.14 Corruption is a global phenomenon and has also become a serious global concern. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption was adopted by the UN General Assembly in October 2003, providing an international instrument against corruption. The ADB-OECD Anti-Corruption Action Plan, which has been signed by the Government of India, is a broad understanding to further the cause of inter-regional cooperation in the matter of prevention of corruption. The World Bank has also declared war against corruption by refusing to fund projects whose implementation is tainted by corrupt practices. At the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group in Singapore in 2006, a joint statement was issued with major multilateral financial institutions agreeing on a framework for preventing and combating fraud and corruption in the activities and operations of their institutions. 1.15 In India, some recent anti-corruption initiatives are steps in the right direction. The Supreme Court has ruled that candidates contesting elections should file details regarding their wealth, educational qualifications and criminal antecedents along with their nomination papers. The Right to Information Act, which has recently been enacted, is a potent weapon to fight corruption. The introduction of information communication technologies, e-governance initiatives, and automation of corruption-prone processes in administration have succeeded in reducing corruption. 1.16 Much more remains to be done, however, and beyond the realm of existing regulation. The escalating levels of corruption in various segments of our economy, resulting in larger-scale generation of black money, serious economic offences and fraud, and money laundering leading even to the funding of terrorist activities against the state, have created a grave situation which needs to be dealt with severely. Benami properties of corrupt public servants need to be forfeited, as also the assets illegally acquired from corrupt practices. Whistleblower legislation has to be put in place to protect informants against retribution. Also, we have to suitably strengthen the institutional framework for investigating corrupt practices and awarding exemplary punishment to the corrupt, thereby raising the risk associated with corrupt behavior. 1.17 Ethics in governance, however, has a much wider import than what happens in the different arms of the government. An across-the-board effort is needed to fight deviations from ethical norms. Such an effort needs to include corporate ethics and ethics in business. In fact, there should be a paradigm shift from the pejorative business ethics to ethics in business. There is need for ethics in every profession, voluntary organization, and civil society structure, as these entities are now vitally involved in the process of governance. Finally, there should be ethics in citizen behavior, because such behavior impinges directly on ethics in government and administration. 1.18 One of the terms of reference of the Administrative Reforms Commission pertains to ethics in governance, specifically the following aspects: A. Vigilance and corruption. Strengthening proactive vigilance to eliminate corruption and harassment to honest civil servants, including, wherever necessary, limiting executive discretion. Addressing systemic deficiencies manifesting in reluctance to punish the corrupt. A. Identify procedures, rules and regulations and factors which lead to corruption. B. Suggest measures to combat corruption and arbitrary decision-making, and C. Suggest a framework for their periodical review in consultation with the stakeholders. B. Relationship between political executive and permanent civil service. To suggest improvements in the institutional arrangements for smooth, efficient and harmonious relationship between civil service and the political executive. C. Code of conduct for different organs of government. Political executive, civil services, etc. 1.19 While the Commission has examined items A and C in considerable detail in this report, item B will be dealt with comprehensively in the ARC's report on civil services reforms. The Commission has examined the relevant laws, codes and manuals, which deal with ethics and corruption. It has critically studied the institutional framework that investigates corruption and brings the corrupt to book. It has also looked at the corruption-prone processes in government and examined the systems, rules and procedures, which govern these processes. 1.20 In order to ascertain views from different stakeholders on ethics in governance, the Commission organized a national colloquium at the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal in September 2006. The Commission expresses its deep gratitude to the then Chief Justice of India, Mr. Justice Shri Y.K. Sabharwal, who delivered the valedictory address. 1. The Minister of State for Personnel, Public Grievances and Pensions and Parliamentary Affairs, Shri Suresh Pachauri, who presided over the inaugural function. 2. And to Mr. Justice S.B. Sinha for his valuable suggestions. The Chairman ARC addressed the gathering. 3. The list of participants at the National Colloquium organized by the Commission on the subject is at Annexa I. 4. The recommendations of the colloquium are at Annexa I. 5. The questionnaire circulated to various stakeholders is at Annexa I. 6. 1.21 The Commission would like to place on record its gratitude to the Lokayuktas, representatives of CVC and the state anti-corruption wings, members of citizens' initiatives, officers of Government of India and the state governments for their active participation in the workshop. The Commission also expresses its deep gratitude to Mr. Justice J.S. Verma, former CJI, Mr. Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, former CJI, Mr. Justice Santosh Hegde, former Judge, Supreme Court, Mr. Justice N. Venkatchala, former Lokayukt Karnataka, Shri Fali Nariman, Shri B.V. Acharya, former Advocate General, Karnataka, Shri K. R. Chamya, former Law Secretary, Government of Karnataka, Shri K. Ishwara Bhatt, former Law Secretary, Government of Karnataka, and Admiral R. H. Tahiliani, RETD, Chairman, Transparency International India, whose views and suggestions have been of immense help to the Commission in articulating its recommendations. The Commission expresses its appreciation for the valuable contribution made by Shri S.K. Das, Consultant ARC, in drafting this report. 1.22 As issues relating to ethics in governance cut across other terms of reference, an attempt has been made to deal with the major issues in this report. The report is organized in 9 chapters dealing with different aspects of ethics in governance. The recommendations range from those seeking to change the legal framework to those which could be implemented through executive directions within a short time frame. Recommendations which could be implemented immediately through executive direction are identified by prefixing a symbol * in the summary of recommendations.